Hi everyone, I'm joined today by Jens Bjorkmann of Stenna Metal. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Thomas, for having me.
You obviously have an extensive experience in ferrous scrap markets globally. Tell me what your expectations are for scrap prices going out towards the end of this year.
Oh, well, so this year is, of course, a somewhat different year, which has had huge effects on everything from raw materials to our everyday lives. And for the scrap and ferrous markets, for the past, since the Corona crisis started, has been very edgy and hesitant and fragile. But since China more or less emerged through the first quarter of 2020, China has more or less held up the rest of the world. Scrap and steel and semi-finished steel product demand has been very strong from China, and that has sort of given the markets a little bit of a buoy to lean on. So very early on in the Corona crisis in the rest of the world outside of China, ferrous markets sort of stabilized quite quickly, and because of course supply and demand of ferrous scrap is very fast, and so if demand fell, but also supply, since industries closed down very quickly, and the mills who were still running, most were scrap based, so demand quickly returned for ferrous scrap, and we can still see that now, and my expectation is through the rest of this year that you will see a continued pickup in production, back to more or less normal levels, and so although industrial production and the societies are more or less opening up again, we will continue to see demand continue to move stronger through the rest of this year is my sort of expectation. When it comes to pricing, it's always challenging because of course stronger demand could lead to stronger prices, but there's also the possibility that you will see a lot more supply come online, and when you see large supply pickups, you could also see some price adjustments downwards. So generally, I feel like this level that we're on now, it's more or less seems like a stable level. We were up at $300, and it came down to in the mid of 280s when we're talking about Turkey, and as soon as China went for a Golden Week holiday, the sort of buoy in the market left, and so prices came off a little bit, but China came back. Non-ferrous metals and metal prices and iron ore prices came back, returned, and so and we've seen similar for ferrous scrap during this week. So a little bit more stabilized conditions this year than previously, I would say.
In terms of China, though, in the coming year, they're talking about liberalizing their import policy on scrap.
Yeah.
How do you see that impacting the rest of the world? If China becomes an important importer of scrap again, how could that affect scrap markets outside of China?
Yeah. So in the longer run, we expect China to be sort of more or less self-sufficient in scrap and adjust their production portfolio according to domestic supply availability. And but currently, there's of course glitches because in some areas there's scrap availability, and in other areas there's steel mills, and domestic and logistics is challenging, and also quality issues domestically. And now with fairly high domestic pricing, it's challenging for mills to attract enough material. So it's likely to happen, and to sort of bring down the domestic prices and also adjust demand. And so mills are able to get a sufficient supply to the right destinations with the right quality specifications. So although it may not be very large amounts, it's going to have some sort of effect, because it will of course adjust a little bit the demand situation in the region of the Far East, and so you will add a little bit of demand from Korea and Taiwan, and sort of the area will be a little bit more of a magnet. So I think it's healthy for the market in general. The investment activities in China might become better also, because you will have some international sort of competition for the available demand, which is good. So I think in general it's a good measure to open up for ferrous imports.
Mm-hmm. And how about markets outside of Asia? Obviously, for the last umpteen years, the Turkish market has been really dominant for pricing. How is that market developing, and how will its influence remain so important?
Well, of course, they were very dominant in the long product segments of more or less all of the Arabic countries and South Asia. They were very large. Now we see some buildup of capacity in South Asia, in the growing regions. We also see it in the MENA region, elsewhere than Turkey, for long products, construction steel and so forth. But in Turkey, what we see now are okay. We see the very large groups continue to be very strong, and the growth area right now is in the flat product segment. So Turkey is an net importer of flat products, and so they are investing in slab production capacity. So you see more and more investments in this sector, and they are mostly scrap based also. So you see a little bit of a shifting demand, perhaps towards a little bit more of higher quality grades of scrap, which probably suits Europe and the United States also very well. And yeah, so this is sort of the shift that's going on a little bit, but the of course the dominant demand is still the long product segments in growth regions, and Turkey continues to be very active in the Asian market and the nearby regions. So very few are able to be as efficient as the Turks are at the moment.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you mentioned the development of longs versus flat products. I think traditionally we would have seen any move towards flats and away from longs as being quite negative for scrap. But there's some changes in that. The EAF mill's ability to produce flat products has improved, but at the same time, for example, in Southeast Asia, you see a lot of long product mills now, which are integrated blast furnace mills, big Chinese investments. Do you think it's still fair to say that scrap is really dominated by longs, and how do you see that balance developing going forward?
Yeah, no, I think so, we expect also that to happen in Asia when the markets are more mature, or when they become more mature and they have more of local supply availability of scrap. Then we expect more of long products to be scrap based. It makes much more sense than to produce from imported iron ore and coking coal. So yeah, it makes much more sense to be scrap based in a long product market where you can also shift a little bit easier.
So do you have any kind of specific outlook for the proportion of global steel production that could be done via EAF compared to converters going forward?
Well, we see a lot of investments going on in like the United States, and also in Europe, and we also see large integrated mills are now moving towards electric arc furnaces in Europe, and I guess this whole environmental part where in Europe you will see much more pressure on carbon emissions. So although the steel sector is more or less 50-50 between integrated and scrap-based, you will likely see more investments into electric arc furnaces in the next 5 to 10 years. If there are any blast furnaces investments, I'm not sure, but you see a lot more into EAF. And I expect that to continue for the next 10, 20 years to happen very fast in China as well.
And there's one last kind of threat to scrap's role in the EAF is increasing investment in DRI and other forms of reduction. How do you see that growing? Do you see it as a serious threat to EAF?
Well, I think it's a complement to the EAF. So when you produce, for example, like flat products via the EAF route, you will likely see like a third of the raw material will be some sort of DRI if it's derived via low carbon routes or regular routes. You will likely see DRI demand to pick up in that sector, and be necessary also to be able to make use of ferrous scrap. The different components will sort of average themselves well in the electric arc furnace. So I think depending on what kind of grades you produce, it's of course still necessary to have some sort of pig iron or DRI in the mix. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Jens Bjorkmann, for joining us.